Coming up, sure, Cam Thomas is ready to be a big point contributor for the Brooklyn Nets. But is anybody else? We break down how the Brooklyn Nets will score in the upcoming season and surprise players deep on this roster ready to explode. All coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marmick. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms, and let you know that now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Oh, baby. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Doug, we're going to get started. We know this is going to be a fun season. It's going to be about growth, about development. But when it comes to scoring, what are we looking at here for this Brooklyn Nets roster?
What are we looking at? So we're looking at like it's going to be tough. This is something
Fun?
that
Did somebody say fun?
it's just it's great, man, because as we really get closer to the season, we start to see how things are rounding out. You have to start to take realistic looks at sort of what's going to happen with this team and make actually I think firm judgments on what can really be accomplished. Talked about this with Josh Lloyd on Locked On Fantasy around just what was going to play out for this team. And the Nets are a really difficult one, I think, to sort of try to figure out what's going to happen, because there's lots of ways it can go, and there's not a wide range of outcomes, but there's a wide range of roster moves, I think, that can be that can sort of end up for this team. But when you really just get down to brass tacks in terms of an NBA basketball team, and you start thinking to yourself, who's going to score on the Nets this year? It's not the easiest answer to just be like, this is how it's going to happen. And we're going to talk Cam Thomas, and we're going to talk some of these other guys, but trying to look realistically at sort of the goal of an NBA team, which is to, hate to break the news to everyone, score the basket, or score the ball in the basket. Our judgment here is that it is going to be overwhelmingly difficult for this team to score this year. Something that we're going to probably see play out over an 82 game stretch.
Yeah, I guess, Doug, if at the end of every game, all you care about is whether or not you scored more points than the other team, fine.
I'm a pure, hey, buddy, sorry if I'm old school that way.
You don't call him Doug the purist Norrie for nothing when it comes to talking NBA hoops. No, listen, and it's, you said talking about some different players here and who could be capable of it. As we know, I mean, as the table setter, Mikal Bridges is gone. He was the second high point man last year. Cameron Johnson is still here, but what's his role going to be? Will he be here long term? Fourth highest point getter. Spencer Dinwiddie, fifth. He's not on this team anymore. The seventh is Lonnie Walker, by the way, at 9.7 a year ago. Not on this team. And the ninth highest, if we're just cutting off the market, top 10 point contributors from a year ago, it was Royce O'Neal. So you have 5 guys in your top 10 that aren't going to be a part of this roster, or one who you think is significantly going to have a different role coming into this year based on what the agenda is. And oh, by the way, all of those guys, if you thought, if you think it's going to be a problem this year, remember that last year I just mentioned 2 of those players didn't score in double digits in Lonnie Walker and Royce O'Neal, smaller roles on the team. Spencer Dinwiddie was only giving you 12.5 points, and even Cameron Johnson's 13.5. So it's not like I'm listing off players who, oh my God, they're losing Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. No, they're just losing some average dudes and bench contributors, but that could have actually been pretty important to have this year based on who they currently have on the team.
And it's not like these guys were replaced by these all-star caliber players, right? And so it's and if we're looking at just a realistic look at sort of how this team, the makeup of this team. Now, again, it's by design, right? This is they went into the season knowing that this was going to be the case. They put their best tanking foot forward for sure. I mean, congratulations on this one, because they, in terms of a tanking team, this is exactly how you want to be constructed, which is to say sort of borderline NBA talent, a couple guys who can maybe hit a little bit of upside, and some flyers on dudes, and some dudes we're going to trade. I mean, that's exactly sort of what the Nets are looking at in terms of overall overall team roster construction. So a couple things out of the way. One, Bridges is gone. for whatever you want to say about Mikal Bridges, underperforming, disappointment, whatever for what he was last year, they didn't replace anyone. They didn't replace him with anyone who can come anywhere close to really what he could do scoring wise, even when you factor in that it was like rough at times for him last year. They just don't have, there's no one else that stepped in that's going to really replace him getting into the mid range, which he was able to do at times. The 3-point shooting was still mostly fine, right? Like he struggled to finish at the basket, but he at least could like try to create his own shot at times. Like they did not really replace him. And then also, because I know what everyone's going to say, well, Cam Thomas. Okay, Cam Thomas last year already had like a 31% usage rate. I mean, how high can it go, right? Like he's like the usage rate is already put into the 30s. He's not going to be, you don't get to the 40s. Like, so it's not like I don't people that the claim could be, oh, well, Cam Thomas gets more shots. There aren't that many more shots for him to take. If we just like realistically look at how a basketball team goes about its business, yes, he can increase a little bit more. The efficiency is going to be what it is. It's not like you just take one guy off the team and give Cam Thomas all the shots. Like it doesn't really work like that. You need to have sort of a balanced attack and be able to score. We'll get to the other guys, but I wanted to just remove the Cam Thomas asterisk here. It's not anti him. It's just pro. He's not this kind of player. He's not a super heliocentric guy. And you just can't add that many more shots to his shot diet realistically. He does not make up the full difference. Let's say that.
No. And just, I mean, to your point here, go back into the NBA last season. Cam Thomas was the 26th highest point total per game, 22.5, tied with DeJounte Murray, tied with Jaren Jackson Jr. of Memphis, and just behind players like Banchero, Paul George, Cade Cunningham. Then you go all the way up to Zion Williams at 22.9, and then you get into 23. So where's he going? I mean, even like, and I think he's going to have an explosion this season, even from a point standpoint. But explosion, how high can I categorize that? Is he going to be a top 10 point scorer? That's 27, 26, 27 points, getting into De'Aaron Fox territory, Jason Tatum territory, Steph Curry territory. If he scores 25 points a game, he's going to be a top 15 guy at a minimum here. And that's only 3 more points. Like, so if you want to contextualize, to your point, even if Cam Thomas is a top 10 guy in the NBA, that's going to get you about 4 more points. So where else are you going to score on this roster when you take away 19, albeit clunky points per night from a player like Mikal Bridges? Coming up here in a second, it's not just about answering the question, can they have any other 20-point scores? No. But also, can they get to double digits from some guys? So are there the younger players, the expanded role guys that can contribute as we work our way through on what I'm going to call a really fun Wednesday episode? We'll dive into double-digit contributors coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style. eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts. For your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about 20-point scorers. Yes, Cam Thomas can be that guy. And oh, by the way, there's the world where I don't know if I want Cam Thomas to score 28 points a night and then also have a completely hollow stat category everywhere else, because we've seen teams like this go that way. I'll still enjoy it, but I prefer some other guys can come along with them. When we look at this roster, I don't know if for you, anybody else would jump out just to put a nail in the coffin of 20-point scores. The only guy on this roster that I could even think would be capable of it based on history and track record would be Dennis Schroder, because because he's a point guard, so the ball's in his hands, and he's shown himself very capable over his career to be a pretty high point scorer, depending on different spots and what his role looked like. That being said, he's also never in his career scored 20 points a game. The closest he ever came was Atlanta, 2017-18, we scored 19 and a half. The year prior, over 17 when he was playing in, 78 and 67 starts. If he starts a ton and you're talking about splitting up maybe him and Cam Thomas for stretches, maybe. The other way that his numbers stay pretty much in the mid-teens is that he's playing with Cam Thomas and he's setting up Cam Thomas to get those more points. But he's the only guy that I spent more than half a second saying, like, can anyone on this roster be a 20-point scorer coming into the season?
Yeah, look, I mean, if he shoots 41% from three, like he did last year with the Nets, and gets the 12.7 shots per game, in 32 minutes up to like 15 and a half shots or something like that, which is a pretty sizable jump and would represent like the second most shots a game that he took in his whole entire career over that stretch. I mean, maybe you can squint and see it, but
and you wouldn't really want that anyway. Like, we don't want him getting the highest volume shot that he's ever had in his career, or the second most on the team, right?
Probably not, right? So, because then you're like, okay, well, what are we actually winning if we win here, right? Like, I don't think that there's really any world where we really want to see that, except that like at some point you just have to be a functional NBA basketball team and be able to go out there and try to do some semblance of what happens in the NBA. I mean, that would be really the only case for it after that. Or you're trying to build his trade value or something like that, because like he's not going to make it through the trade deadline. I mean, there's a few other scenarios here where it makes sense. But yeah, like, sort of like rounding back to the beginning, because I know some people, look, I know there's a tendency to want to, think glass half full on some of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. I'm all for seeing how guys develop. But just thinking about like sort of realistically how scoring happens in the NBA, it often, I mean, there's a lot of ways, but there's really only a few ways, right? Like, and you need to have high on ball creators, because you need to be able to tax defenses in order to like sort of make decisions, over rotate, and then find open shooters, right? Or you just need to have guys that are so good on their own that they're able to sort of work their way into different positions, like Shea, KD, like these guys who can just sort of create are one-man offensive engines because they're able to just like score so well. Or like Luka, Jokic, where they're able to tax defenses into like overcommitting onto the ball and then finding open shooters. So there's a few different ways, run pick and roll all the time, because you have like, just really devastating rim threats combined with a guy who can finish at the rim also, who's a ball handler. I mean, that's kind of all the ways, right? It's hard. It's hard to do it, but it's not, we're not splitting the atom here and trying to figure out how to do it. Now, I've just gone through the three basic ways that you can score. Outside of Cam Thomas and maybe Dennis Schroder, can anyone on the team do any of those things? No, yeah. Right? Like they just really can't. Not on a consistent basis as well. This is already a team that ranked 23rd in offensive efficiency or offensive rating last year. And that was when they were kind of trying, right, for most of the season. So it's an interesting way to look at it. I guess we can look about like who could actually step into the void, and that's an interesting discussion. But I really wanted to like just sort of level, like just sort of making sure everyone's like thinking about this. We just want to make sure you're thinking about this correctly. Like you have to be thinking about this correctly, because we see a lot of people out there that are not thinking about this correctly, I don't think. And
we had a YouTube comment, and I'm not knocking anybody for the take, but that was the general sentiment was Nets are going to be okay. They'll be a team that maybe can be making a push for a playoffs. Now that's a whole other conversation in terms of where they're at, but just from a premise of winning basketball games, to even think that you could be a team, this team could be in that position. That means that on a micro level of individual players, you're looking across this roster and you're saying, hey guys, we've got dudes that can go get buckets. I mean, tongue in cheek, as I said at the top when I was laughing with Doug, but you got to be able to score in the NBA, and you can't sit here objectively on August 21st and say, oh yeah, I could see 95 to 115 points out of this team.
No way.
If you're putting in a margin, right? I mean, we're talking about, hey, this team may score in the 80s more often than it scores in the 100s on a lot of nights, depending on how long it takes teams to say, we've beaten you and we're going ahead, we're putting in the bench units here. And that actually, I think, is going to be a big factor too, not to go off, but there's going to be a lot of garbage time opportunities in a lot of these games this season. They're going to cloud the way people look at it. I do agree with you though. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, go ahead, because I'm gonna make a Jordy Fernandez point later, but you can keep going, and I would just kind of file it away here.
No, so as we talk about, you mentioned, who else is going to be able to step up? Who's going to be surprising guys? So we talk about Cam Thomas. We know that Schroder, he averaged almost 15 points a game last year. Okay, so let's just put him right in that same spot. Cameron Johnson, again, 13 and a half points. That's it. 15, 16 points is the most I think you could ever really earmark him for. Then it's Claxton.
Real quick, pause on him real quick. Pause on Cam Johnson real quick. I want to make one point about him where we were wrong, right? We
yes,
thought
yeah.
him.
I think I said this one of the other episodes last week where I was like, speaking of guys we thought was going to take a leap and did not.
Oh, dude, we were so wrong about that. I mean, go back a year ago today almost. We were like, most improved player, Cam Johnson. He's going to get all these shots. And I had like a bunch of best ball stuff that was like kind of relying on guys like this to go. I mean, it shouldn't have gone more wrong. But we saw last year, maybe some injury stuff, the expanded shot diet from him, or like the ability to sort of increase his game to like off the dribble, beat a couple guys. We didn't see that. So I just wanted to I don't want to spend a lot of time on Cam Johnson, and I don't think he's gonna be on the team forever. But we also, I think, saw the opportunity was a little bit there for him last year, and that's just really not in him. So anyway, you were gonna go on the Claxton too, but I just wanted to pause on him real quick to kind of dispel any thought about him expanding his game into this like high-end wing creator. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, that back end of the season when he first came over via the trade and 16, almost 17 points a night. Well, guess what? He reverted right back to every other year previously, 13-9, 12-5, etc. So 100% though, and 100%, we were 100% wrong on thinking that Cam Johnson was going to expand his game in any way. But so when you go beyond them, though, then it's Nicholas Claxton, almost 12 points a game last season. That's all the double-digit contributors that you currently have on the roster. And I think it does become interesting, and we'll look at here, who are the guys that are going to clearly see expanded roles here that are going to meet, at least in some categories, the criteria that Doug is talking about. We know a player like Keon Johnson is now going to have a chance to carve out a role for himself, that Jalen Wilson is clearly pushing into this unit, that Trendon Watford, we think, can be a part of an active day-to-day, game-over-game roster. And then what about the questions of Day'Ron Sharpe? All these players fall in the category of, can they get to double digits? Can we talk about players that if they were single-digit guys or didn't have big enough roles, now in expanded opportunities, can they also expand how we look at them specifically on the offensive end? We'll go ahead and turn our attention over first, Doug, to my secret play. And that's Trendon Watford. If there's anybody on this team that can do it, I think it is Trendon Watford, because, listen, you can go look at by 100 possessions, but I have to throw those out the window because I did it with Trendon Watford first. And I said, oh, look, he can be a 20-point scorer a game if he gets 100 possessions. Then I did it with Day'Ron Sharpe. He can be almost a 23-point scorer if you give him 100 possessions based on stats. But because he has the 3-point shooting, Trendon Watford, because he has the on-ball dribbling skills, because in the open floor, right, like he can attack at the basket, he has enough skill set here where when you look at him from a year ago, where, again, he's only playing under 14 minutes a night and he's only averaging 7 points a game, I very easily, and go back to the minute prediction episode where I gave him a big chunk going into this year, I can easily look at him and say, we can look back and talk about a 15-point scorer for the Brooklyn Nets based on role and opportunity, which I know is lofty. And I'm talking about that's the ceiling maybe for him, but I do think that it's not unrealistic based on his 3-point shooting and then on-ball ability in transition.
All right, I have an agreement there and a disagreement about Trendon Watford, and then another guy to throw out. We'll get into that here in 1 second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, you hear about us talking about FanDuel all the time. America's #1 sportsbook. We got a little something different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and TV. You heard me right. $5, 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube or YouTube TV. With YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. You love to hear that. All you need is a Google account. We pretty much all got those. And a current form of payment. You can cancel any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we wrap up today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about who else is going to score alongside Cam Thomas and at least be a contributor in the background. New double-digit contributors. I do want to get to Jalen Wilson, I think, too. That's the fan favorite kind of coming out of Summer League, obviously. But when it comes to Trendon Watford, My assumption is you agree, yes, expanded game, more points, but maybe how many points could be too many points when I say 15 for him coming in.
Yeah, for sure. The caveat here, one, is he needs to have a role. Like, for me to even believe this could happen, he has to be
Well,
like the
yeah.
seventh man or above. And I'm
Yeah,
not sure even that's a guarantee right now. So, like, that's a little, this is what's a
yeah.
very hard thing to, go ahead. Yeah.
No. And this, by the way, is when we did go back and check out our minutes breakdown episode
Yeah.
where when I lean more youth and Doug still rightfully, potentially keeps some veterans in the mix. This is how Trendon Watford gets there for me. It's like you have to have the role, to your point. It has to be that from day one, it looks like Trendon Watford is now a part of that top 7 kind of group for this team.
For sure. And by the way, maybe he gets replaced with Bojan Bogdanovic because he's healthy, and now maybe he's actually the second highest scorer. I mean, that's a realistic thing. We probably just buried him a little bit too much in this discussion. The problem is he's been barely mentioned. He had this injury. We don't even know what the deal is with him. He's like not talked about at all. He could easily be the second guy. He actually has it. He's actually shown it before. The problem is he's older, and he's on the tail end of his career here. What's that?
And it's not fun to talk about. It's not fun to talk about Bogdanovic being a high point.
The problem we didn't leave with him is like we're not even sure he's gonna be on the team long term. He's 35 years old. He's coming off an injury. He did average 20 points a game in Detroit last year in 33 minutes a game. The situation's just so different. So maybe we should have started with it. Maybe we should have caveated him first. I'm not sure. He feels a little bit like the lost man here because he just never gets spoken about in no Nets. Other people write about him. I'm not sure he's healthy. Like whatever. Anyway, so
the most Netsian thing would be that Bogdanovic, we come to the season, Bogdanovic is starting. Like that would be the most Netsian thing. It's not going to happen.
He could. He could. He could. I don't know. Like I think we run the risk here of having talked about him too little. I just do think there's other pieces that are in play here. Specifically, he's old and he was injured, right? Yeah. And so I like these are and he might get traded. I don't know. But anyway, with Watford, if he is like, let's say the 7th guy, because these other guys are out of the mix, or 6th man, or you just need the ball handling. Yeah, I think that there's a world where for sure, like the case for is that he's not great at anything, but he's good enough at most things to be able to just worm his way into the basket, get out and transition a little bit. I mean, the fact that he shot threes at like 40% last season in, smaller sample size, but he still did it. This is like a little more than 1 a game. I don't know if that gets up to 2 a game. Can you kind of see it happening a little bit more? Maybe that they might have to like use him as a quasi kind of like combo guard a little bit, or just wing guy just because they don't have enough ball handling. I think that he has it in him to probably get up to like, 14 points a game on 25, 26 minutes. I'm just not confident the minutes are going to be there. And that's really why I can't do it. I think skill set wise, at least he can do some things that a lot of these other guys can't. But like we'll put it this way. If given the same amount of minutes, I would actually give him a higher scoring upside than Cam Johnson. I just don't think it's realistic to expect the same amount of minutes. Is that fair? Like, I think that's the pushback.
Yeah. And I have to go back and look at it because I think I gave him like 20 and I still had Cam Johnson like a 24, right? And I made sure to give Jalen Wilson some minutes. So it's easier for me to close that gap when I think like, I think they'll go with some of these younger guys. I think that you'll see him have more of an opportunity. But you mentioned there the key thing for him, and this isn't a knock, but it's one of the things when you go ahead and you expand stats and say, well, over 100 possessions, the 3-point shooting on smaller sample sizes is easy to get a little bit funky. As that number expands, typically it comes down to earth maybe a little bit. So can he increase the 3-point shooting volume and then go ahead and put more points on? Of course, but he has to be able to show that he can do that with consistency. And it was funny. The other thing we talk about, I don't know if it caught your eye or not, but Nicholas Claxton comes back on this massive contract. And I started thinking about Day'Ron Sharpe a little bit. Well, if he had a role, which we could never possibly assume he will, can he be a double digit? Can he be a very just barely 10 points a game and then a whole bunch of rebounds? Maybe, obviously, if he has enough minute shares. The Nicholas Claxton one that I just thought was funny, he took more 3-point shots his rookie season in those very minimal games that he played, 7, than any other season in his career. Like that idea that was ever going to happen. And I dreamed on that after his rookie season, because 7's a lot, guys. You get to 12 your next year, 13 the following year. Wait, let me finish. 14 by the time you get to it. That never expanded, which unfortunately does kind of cap in terms of scoring. And we know what he is offensively. What you can expect, though, I mean, at most, it'll be hard for Nicholas Claxton to be a 15-point double-double guy a night for the Brooklyn Nets because there's only really one facet to the game there. He started to get that push shot, that little bit expanding away from the basket slightly, but it's one of those things when you go down the list of who are the best players on this team that can then contribute in the scoring department, they really don't have that as well. So it's just a footnote around Nicholas Claxton as you look through who are guys, and these aren't knocking anyone. It's just talking from a pure scoring perspective that could go and take a leap from where they were a year ago to what they maybe can do this upcoming season. Are there any other, guys for you that jump out, single-digit players? I'll put Keon Johnson in the mix if he's going to play at all here because he did a pretty good job on small amount, but I don't know if he's going to play any minutes or not with consistency. There's not a lot of guys. There's not a lot of guys to think that can, Ben Simmons, he'll come back healthy, right? And he'll be a 15 and 10 guy, if I'm not mistaken. Triple-double.
Yeah, it's hard to see it again. Like I'm willing to, and I want to be surprised here. I think the one of the fun things about this season is that going into it, it's almost for sure that one of these guys will pop. Right? They're gonna be given more of a leash to be able to go out there and just kind of play. They're going to be, some of these guys are going to be given more offensive opportunity. They're going to be given just more minutes than we're even able to predict right now. Like again, when we went through our minutes thing and talking to other people too, like it's all over the place on these like projections and predictions. We just can't, we actually just get even into the preseason to see what the Nets think, they have. So I think we're going to be surprised by some of these guys. I'm excited for that. Like, I can't wait to just see if one of these dudes that's out there, Killian Hayes, or Simmons makes a comeback, or, Bojan looks good so they can trade him, or, Keon Johnson ends up just playing more, Jalen Wilson. Like, there's a lot of guys here that I think are going to, let me put it this way. There's going to be multiple guys on the Nets this year whose stock is higher at the end of the season than it is now because they were just given more of an offensive role and they were given a better chance to kind of go out there and succeed. I feel confident about that. What I was going to say about Jordy Fernandez before is that I think I'm very glad he's the coach in this situation. And what I'm not really going to want to hear too much is if it's not really working for some of these guys, it's oh, they're not running the right schemes or whatever. This roster is so poorly constructed from a real NBA roster. There's only so many schemes you can run. Go back to the top when I said all the different ways to score in the NBA. The Nets don't have any of that, right? You can only scheme out so much of this. So anyway, some of these guys are going to end up being put in a good situation, and we're going to be really pretty pumped about it. It's just it's just so hard to discern who it's going to be.
No, and I think it's a good reminder, like we talked about with coaches in years past, whether it was Steve Nash with superstars or even Jacques Vaughn, right? Oh, well, what are you not doing well to put these guys in good positions? I think there will be big stretches this season when we talk about good learning opportunities here for a lot of these guys. And I think that Jordy Fernandez comes in with the right agenda of, growing pains, guys. Guess what? That's what it's going to look like. Hopefully along the way, when you mention, especially a guy like Jalen Wilson, any of these young players, that whatever we see from them, that it looks consistent over larger sample sizes, right? Because the last thing you want is Trendon Watford explodes for 12 games and then goes ice cold for a month and, gets buried on the depth chart. You do want to be confirming things this year. And if you can confirm that a guy like Jalen Wilson is ready to take over the role from Cam Johnson and then try to exceed it going forward, that's a really good check mark. Even if it only ends up being 13, 14 points a game, that can still matter. You just have to see the incremental progress. Good to put a positive spin on what is a intentionally lighthearted view at where the scoring comes from for Brooklyn this year.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated. Everyone that's rocking with us through the summer, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube where we're climbing toward 8,000 subscribers. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast as well. Rate and review wherever you can. Free for you, great for us. Subscribe over on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast.
Quality is not an act. It is a habit. And that was one Ari Stotle.
Oh, what are the alt? It took me a second there. That's a good one, buddy. All right. Well, we'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.